some live.
Welcome, Robyn.
Stephen is still laughing at my hair.
It's great.
I was very tired and I just let it air dry and didn't do anything to it. So I now look like a labradoodle. I can't help it.
I know. I mean, I tend to let my hair air dry as well, but it does not.
Yeah, but your hair doesn't. Your hair stays in one spot. I have. I have the hair of approximately 15 different people on my head. Like half of it is straight, half of it is wavy. Who knows? It's a mystery. Some of it's curly. Like it's different all over. This is just a big mess.
So when
I was lazy,
we were discussing what to start off with, and you just written about Gavin Newsom's kind of expert, something we hoped someone would do, and our
yeah, no, we've been saying it for a bit.
So,
So if you didn't read the post earlier this morning, what happened was Gavin Newsom, governor of California, put out a notice saying that since the Supreme Court is like, oh, you can just, it's totally fine if Texas wants to basically make abortion illegal by putting it to civil suits by citizens, he's going to do the same thing with guns, which we've been saying, at least Stephen and I have, that is a thing that needs to happen. Because, you know, they need to know that if they try shit, we're also going to try shit.
Mm-hmm. Escalation is important, and something that if, I mean, this is schoolyard 101, but if bullies know you will never respond, either verbally or they're not going to stop by the goodness of their hearts. And
also ignoring them doesn't work. Like,
well, I've written about this where, yes, exactly, but I've written about this where, and I will frequently write about it of explicitly when Ruth Bader Ginsburg, when they rammed through Amy Coney Barrett, and everyone was all, Democrats were upset about it, and this is ridiculous, and she's gonna, all this terrible stuff she will do, but we actually can't be mean to her because she's a nice white lady. So we're also gonna have a very nice and polite confirmation hearing, and then Feinstein will hug Lindsey Graham. But people were saying, senators I like Brian Schatz and Chris Murphy's guy, were like, well, things are going to change, but then nothing changed, which means that you are full of hot air when you say that. And McConnell laughs at you. It's just like, okay, well, you can expect regular order after this. And I've written how have Democrats behaved since gaining power differently than they would have if McConnell hadn't pushed Barrett on it. So there's no if McConnell's like,
there's no consequences. There's no they act with absolute Sinema was saying, well, if we eliminate the filibuster for things we want, they'll then eliminate the filibuster for things they want, because we're acting as if they wouldn't do that anyway, regardless of whether or not we did it. They're like, oh, we were gonna play by the rules.
Yeah.
But then you guys broke the rules. No, if they wanted to do it, they'd do it. There's nothing stopping them from doing it.
Oh God. And Sinema, who's patting herself on the back some more, tweeting, she got ratioed, because she gets ratioed all the time, about her wonderful bipartisan thing that proves that you don't need purity tests and all this sort of garbage. And again, people criticize Cori Bush or Omar or AOC or Tlaib for anyone who says, okay, you said defund and that's going to hurt us in our elections. Well, it also hurts if Democrats are essentially running entirely on, okay, well, Republicans are literally, they try to coup, they don't believe in democracy. It does not benefit anyone to have Democrats also saying, like they're living in a West Wing episode about the joys of working with other Republicans. She never talks about, all she does, despite abortion rights being rolled back, she just tweets some Ruth Bader Ginsburg quote about abortion's good. Well, yeah, but they're stopping it. I enjoy having a house as people are taking my home away from me. It's like not a particularly, you need to actually do something at the time, and she's just not. So back to your point, there's a
You're cutting out a lot.
of like, oh, well, we don't want to be as bad, that you do not want to be as bad as the other guys, right? Like you don't want to be like Republicans, except it's not apples and or guns are inherently bad. Abortion is inherently a
I was
positive
actually
thing.
saying, like, I mean, guns are objectively worse. Assault rifles are objectively worse than abortion. Like, one is, you know, dealing with fetuses who cannot like live on their own. The other is like school children who can, in fact, live on their own. And if these people cared so much about life, they'd probably, you know, be slightly less inclined to be like assault weapons for everyone. Because there's really no, there's no point to, that other than murdering people.
Kill someone, you know, it's not like me, my Christmas card, me posing with my Simply Safe, which keeps people from breaking in or have an alarm or any sort of defensive posture. It's just like, I want to kill someone. And I'm very big on that as well. Like I would, to my child or anyone about guns, I just hate seeing with children because it's like, this means you're prepared to kill someone and to take a life. And when Kyle Rittenhouse is sobbing on the stands, like, okay, fine, but you went there prepared to kill someone, and this is
absolutely,
and it's not it's not necessarily a positive. I mean, something that doesn't come up a lot that I think should regarding the abortion discussion, to have these laws and essentially to have Roe overturned and to not push back against this absurd, quote unquote, pro-life posture when Republicans have, I believe, uniformly demonstrated they don't care about people other than themselves regarding the pandemic. Essentially, they've stated on a moral level, inconveniencing me for 9 months. Because at the time when we were like 9 months into it, I wrote about, okay, well, this has been the period that you're asking a pregnant person to be inconvenienced, even if you just drop the child off at a foundling home or blow it off in a rocket like the Amy Coney Barrett. Like, what about Superman? That worked out for him. They just took the baby and blew it up to another planet. Why not? You know, that was like, people were rioting after a month of no Walmart. Forget swollen ankles and all of that. And not, it was like, oh my God, and why are you making me do this? I'm not going to wear a mask because of your grandmother or because of you or because you're immunocompromised. So it's very clear on a fundamental
level. It has nothing to do with like, it has everything to do with like the particular culture that they want that involves, you know, women being subservient to men. And, you know, end of the day, that's what it's about. And that's why, like, you know, they're coming at that from like all other fronts as well, with the anti-feminism shit. But back to Newsom, who has somewhat redeemed himself in my eyes. I have actually refused to, Stephen knows this, I refused to acknowledge Gavin Newsom for like several months because he was quite close with Tom Girardi, who is the husband of Erica Jane Girardi from the Real Housewives of Beverly Hills. But this is not just housewife shit. Like, he took all of this money, he stole all of this money from like burn victims and things. Like, he's a terrible human being. So I was like, Gavin Newsom is on my shit list. And now Gavin Newsom is off my shit list because he's actually getting some shit done. I absolutely think this is wonderful and that we need to be doing so much more of this. In general.
Absolutely. And just to interject, I think Newsom in a way also deserves a bit of credit for winning the recall after what we saw in Virginia, because I think everyone was like, it was like, oh, well, California. It's like, well, okay, and maybe there's a bit more room for a potential swing, but he maintained his same level of support, and there was trying to fuel this whole sense of, you know, backlash, cultural backlash, the COVID restrictions you are forcing me to live. So I think he didn't hide, and I think he kind of came out
Yeah.
strong. I think that's important. And he's someone we will, I imagine, see later down the line. So I think this is
Yeah.
also, he's picking this, not picking this fight, but he's making the stance that I think will be important on a national level. And it's like, I'm not going to hide from guns as well. We should be doing this. I think it makes sense. I think you should be held accountable for the damage you do with the guns.
Yeah.
And I don't consider them tricks. Again, it's like a lot of the stuff of like, okay, well, you have a right to abortion, but, and you've spoken about this last week, you will have to drive 300 miles to access that right to abortion. We will harass you because of our First Amendment right. We'll harass you as you enter the abortion clinic. We will make it as difficult for you as possible. There are certain things you could actually do on the gun side that I believe
absolutely. Like, we should be making that shit harder for them, and, you know, as much as possible all over the place. And the thing is, there's actually, like, you know, a little bit of a relation there between the masking and everything and the sorry, I'm bad at words right now, and abortion shit, because, like, in the media that's not us is largely pretending that, oh, all of this stuff actually is really unpopular and Democrats are doing it because it's the right thing, but, you know, it's not what the people want. But it literally is what the people want. Like, all of the statistics show that, like, most people are, you know, vaccinated and want everyone to be vaccinated. They want to be able to go to places and know that everyone there is vaccinated. They want masking, and, you know, in areas that require it. And, you know, Republicans are very big on trying to set the terms and being like, oh, everyone hates this. Like, everyone hates abortion. You guys are alone in trying to protect this right. But in reality, like, 70% of the country believes that abortion should be legal. And just going along and pretending that these things are unpopular when they are in fact very popular. We just disappeared. When they're in fact very popular is okay. Yeah.
No,
is detrimental to us.
Well, I think it becomes a sense of we're defining the country by the Republicans who are elected. It's a structure where, you know, Marjorie Taylor Greene gets elected. So it's a very base-centered strategy. And by the media, basically, oh, well, this bill, and, you know, again, it seems like I beat up on Democrats, but it's like I beat up on the people who feed this. So in Manchin or Sinema, of like, well, I don't want to even touch this bill, nuking the filibuster to pass voting rights, which 80% of the voters support, is wrong because it has to have Susan Collins. You know, I need X amount of Republicans to support it, which isn't necessarily connected to what the people want. And it's similar to with the student loan debate.
Well, you know, they're basically, in many ways, they're manufacturing consent, as it were. They are, you know, they're arranging voting. Sorry, I can't think we're saying it. So they're making it so it's a lot easier for them and their crazy people to get elected. And then people are going, oh, well, obviously this is what the country is into. When in fact, like, no, it's what the gerrymandered country is very into, not people as a whole. And so therefore, like, you know, I think a lot of people who don't pay that much attention to things will be like, oh, there must be something to this.
Oh, yes. And same with
to some degree.
And you know, I think manufactured consent is a good argument as well, because there's we saw it with abortion rights afterward, when people were criticizing people for not voting, and that somehow being the cause of these people being in the Supreme Court or whatever. And we saw it some kind of gross tweets about Kentucky because, oh, it's quote unquote a red state, even though you're talking about the governor is a Democrat, and if you don't like Rand Paul and Mitch McConnell, you're still talking about like what 60-40. So you're dismissing. And did you believe you were not really a worthy human being when Trump was president or Judge W. Bush was president? Like, you know, so it's like
I would like to say I know a whole lot of really cool people from Kentucky who are awesome and super progressive and very smart and like gay Kentucky people who are,
and the folks who are really
people are the same all over.
are often marginalized
Yeah.
groups. And I think, but what happened,
Absolutely.
well, they voted for this, which is, again, not entirely true, but it is people often vote for things. And I feel like I said, I find a very non-progressive view of just dismissing the sense that people can get broken down and believe that the government
Mhm.
is leading them. Republicans love that. So there's two senses of
Absolutely.
government distrust. So the people who, like, white folks, I hate the government and I'm going to vote for crazy Marjorie Taylor Greene. And then often minorities or poor people of all races are like, the government never does anything for me. It's the same, different boss, same as the last boss. And there's a
Yeah.
moderate democratic view that, oh, well, look at all of this, and they've cut child poverty, and you just list statistics where it's like, well, fundamentally, these people don't believe that. So you need to find out what
Yeah.
and then it's like, well, why do you deserve to be inspired? You want a pony or something, which I don't think that, I don't know how that helps anyone at all or gets a vote. And it's
Well, because
more,
like when I say this stuff, I'm not just talking about like me. I pay attention to things and fairly aware. However, in general, need to be made aware of like how this is improving your actual life, not just like, hey, here's some statistics, like that doesn't hit people where they live. I say this a lot, but like part of the reason why seniors vote citizens, but back, because they have Social Security on the line.
yeah, they vote for things that matter to them. Yeah. The idea that people aren't,
yeah,
that that good voters show up and dutifully vote, and it's not believe that they are doing in their own self-interest. And it's this belief that's not, like the idea that Republicans always show up, and it's like, well, they didn't like McCain, they didn't like Romney. I mean, the MSNBC crowd did, but they didn't like them,
yeah,
and so they stayed home. That's part of the reasons that Democrats won those years. And in those cases, the more inspiring candidate won. The more inspiring candidate has won every year, and inspiring of something. You can disagree.
yeah,
I'm sure there are people who obviously don't think Obama was inspirational, or don't think George W. Bush was compelling to people, or Trump. But the bottom line is they were to enough people. And so that becomes important
exactly.
to inspire a sense of, I can make constructive change. If you're a sense of like, you can't, and that nothing will matter. Also the same with investing in people. So I see often, well, young people are pointless and silly and don't vote. We need to focus on people, I guess, around my age. They're the ones who show up. And it's like, okay, and I've had this conversation in, the nonprofit world, the other world. If you don't invest the time on, say the small donors, like, well, they're not worth the time. They will become big donors later. And then later they're like, well, now you're talking to me, like I'm already committed to these other organizations that I've been with over this time. And if you're not connecting to young people now, if you dismiss David Hogg and you talk about
Yeah.
like, oh, the way he said this, I don't like, or whatever, he's some dumb kid, kids don't vote, focus on the other. Well, when he's 40, why do you assume he's going to be now
Yeah.
a loyal Democrat? What you've done is cut off. I mean, I think even now, if you were to ask like people around my age or slightly older, like why they've been voting Democratic, they will often talk about 1992, first year I voted. It was a very youth-centered election. You had Clinton on Arsenio Hall and whatever, and it felt like, wow, this is fun, this is cool. You had the whole, when my dorm is erupting in screams because Clinton won, and if Marjorie Taylor Greene was there, because we went to school together, she would not probably have been one of the people cheering Clinton's win and victory. And but it wasn't this sense of, oh, well, what a responsible civic minded people we are. It's like, no, we feel
exactly.
and then that inspired us down the line and made that relationship with the party. So I think that's important. And so, when people say that student loan debt relief for student loans, things in general, is a losing proposition, it just seems like, okay, well, you're talking again about Republican voters. So to the extent that Lauren Boebert will say that's a terrible thing, who cares?
Yeah.
Because Republicans don't govern that way. They're like, how do I
make my base is that heard? One of the things that Republicans always say that they count on is, the silent majority of people who will vote for them because secretly they think their policies benefit them. And, I do think that's true, because I think there are a lot of people who talk out their faces about, wanting to be, very polite and progressive and everything. And at the end of the day, they don't want their taxes going up. I do think that absolutely exists. But I also think that there might be some people out there who, we don't count on that a lot. Like, we don't go like, oh, maybe those people will vote for us in secret because they want their student loans to go away, which is, a pretty major thing for people. If people can get that to go away, if people, quite frankly, if we can at some point make public college a reality, like publicly funded college, people are going to vote to keep that, because there are people who are like, I don't know how I'm going to pay for college for my kids.
Yes.
And I think that by doing certain things for people, and in a way that is visible and that people can, and concrete, and that, actually affects people's lived experiences in life, that's going to get votes more so than Absolutely. We're just the good people, obviously. And yes, you and I know that, but you
no, it's a reasonable. And when people have said don't beat up on Lauren Boebert because she's uneducated, she could have a Harvard degree and be terrible, which is true. There are a lot of
I agree with that.
Degrees and are terrible. My problem with her is she doesn't know what she doesn't know. She's fundamentally intellectually incurious. I think in that aspect, it connects. I mean, I have a degree, but I don't assume that I am fundamentally an expert on certain fields that have no, this sort of gut. And that goes back to Bush, who had multiple degrees, but it was the same, in a weird way, it's the same thing. Boebert is kind of the reflection of Bush's truthiness and thinking from my gut. It's I don't really, this feels right, which is sort of a very kind of mean thing.
Yeah.
And she also is very oh, well, college just indoctrinates you to hate your, so she's overtly anti-college, overtly anti-education. She is the character in all the movies who kind of beats up on her sister who's going to go to college. It's just well, you're going to go and you change. You're not, why do you think you are worthwhile? And why do you think that you are a better person? Our mutual friend Claire we were talking about how we would love if
we gotta Claire on. I'm
good. The ideal for me, the great Harlequin Channel Christmas movie should be about, instead of this lady from New York for a great job coming in and deciding to live in a small town or whatever, it should be actually about the person in the small town who was made to feel like garbage. And oh, when I go to the city, I meet people who think like me or think I'm not a terrible person or a nerd.
I think that was my actual life, so I'm very sympathetic to that. I'm sorry, you walk around this is what my hair looked like before the invention of frizzies. I tried hair products for Black people actually when I was a kid, and it did not work out because white lady curly hair is very different. So I was just on a raft. But I got made fun of terribly for my hair and other things. But here's where I have an issue with the people going after Boebert for certain things specifically. I internally cringe every time people make a joke about having a GED, for a lot of reasons, one of which is the fact that I want people who dropped out to go and get their GED and get an education. And I think making fun of that just gets me in a way. I don't like that. I genuinely I don't know that she misspells things in order to get attention in that way, but I know a lot of the Republicans do. I know they do. They do it on purpose so that people go after like, oh, they're the spelling mistakes instead of the actual bullshit that is coming out of their mouth. And I think that's a big problem.
Well, I think people react to her. She literally is a trope. She feels like a TV character. So generally speaking, on every TV character, it's not so much actually even misspelling that reveals the not just a dumb character, not the lovable Joey, but the dumb character you don't like, is when they are like, like trying to use a fancy term, but using it poorly or incorrectly. So I think what she says, it's not enough to her, like if she's really this straight shooting, plain spoken person, she would just be, why does the media care about children, which is a BS stat or whatever. But she would say, that's the problem. Instead, she kind of has to frame it in some kind of fanciful way. And again, based on sitcoms, whatever, that's usually the jerky character does that. And you're supposed to kind of react. So I think people are kind of having that instinctive reaction to her.
Yeah. I get that, but I feel like it's fake, especially because the thing that she,
But I just, it must be like, it almost is like she's being written as a terrible, because again, I always feel like unless you are just unless you process television entirely differently, like Ted Cruz grew up in a world where when he watches MASH, he's like, that Hawkeye sucks, but Frank Burns, he's the hero of this story. It's like, what? I don't think so. Like, why are you modeling yourself? Like, he behaves like it's not even this like, well, you are just so obviously every bad character on TV and movies. Like, just don't be that. Like, most of us are like, oh, we shouldn't do that, or we shouldn't like try to feed a girl a poison apple. Like, we shouldn't do these things. These are pretty obvious. And so Bobart is like just such a bully. I mean, and that's more than her. Who cares about her spelling? To your point, it's just the stuff when you see her in a crowd, like she was giving the jokes on Omar, and her reaction when someone is responding positively to the racist joke is very, I think, compelling to anyone who knows people like that, especially growing up. The bullies, see of like how they thrive on like the attention, and that it's true. I think she loves getting the attention.
There is power. I've always said this. There is so much power in getting to be the person that is an asshole and still being like socially tolerated. That's where all of the, power from middle school bullies comes from. But here's what I'm going to say. Liberals making fun of people's spelling comes off. It proves their point as like, us being elitist or whatever. And it drives me crazy because specifically with like Bobert's point, her point was stupid. It's not that there are, nearly 500,000 kids who are missing and no one cares about it but her. Absolutely not. 500,000 kids are not missing. And she's also trying to suggest that they are, it's stranger abductions, probably to go like, murder, take these kids' adrenaline to make adrenochrome and everything, going along with that whole like QAnon shit. That is not what's happening at all. Yeah. Most kids who are missing, it's like kids in the foster system, kids who run away, and it's very, very big percentage are like custody battles. So like it's so disingenuous to try and say what she's trying to say, and that is, I think, what needs to be addressed, and not the fact that she's bad at words, because I think that just makes us look unsympathetic.
Well, and also, again, to make it like the TV, because I'm a writer or whatever, but generally people who correct people's grammar and spelling
are the
jerks on TV. There's no cool character who does that. Like,
exactly.
It's actually literally like that.
Actually.
There's no Humphrey Bogart movie. I mean, it's just not just, and even on Cheers when.
Sorry, I'm like trying to picture that.
Correcting, right, by the way. No.
I don't think that I can do a Humphrey Bogart impersonation as we're just discovering.
But I mean, Diane on Cheers, whenever she would kind of criticize the working class characters, but for in those aspects she would look bad, but when she would essentially stand up in a sense of challenging logic. So there's one episode she's challenging homophobia.
Exactly. Yes, that
Is like
is
a
good.
Girl Diane episode because she's challenging their logic about like yes, because the gayness is contagious. So stuff like that is zingers like that. And so that's what you kind of can do. If I could go back to your statement about public college, I definitely agree with that because, you know, whenever it's like, well, college not for everyone or whatever, it's like, well, I would think there needs to be something.
If people want it, it should be like.
And make it many different things. It doesn't have to be the same format. It can be something where you're going and learning if you want to be a trade, something where we're funding that sense of if you want to learn a trade or whatever, but the state is funding it, much like it's being funded for up till, 12, till you're 18, which again, Republicans would gladly not do, have gladly been fighting. David Perdue wants to get rid of K through 12. So they in Georgia. So I mean, everyone would like, why should I educate your kids? Because so I think, and it also bothers me, like when Amy Klobuchar, I think during in the primaries, others would say like, college isn't for everyone. And it's like, you mean your kids? Is your kid not college material? And they never mean that. So that always
college isn't for, I feel like the people they say like, oh, well, college isn't for everyone. They're talking specifically about poor people who like, they're not talking about, their kids. They're not talking about like there's a difference between it not being for everyone and it not being an option for everyone. Yeah. And especially if we're going to live in a world where, I was trying to telling this to my dad last night. If we're going to live in a world where employers like, take the attitude of, we just want to know that you went to college and finished. Doesn't matter what you majored in, which is like what people my age were told when we were growing up. And it is extremely fucked up in retrospect. If they want to do that, then we need to have that be available to everyone, because if everyone can't afford it, then that's not the judgment of character people think it is.
And in our sort of corporate structured reality, I kind of resent. It is certainly true. There are plumbers who make, and deservedly so. So it's an important trade, obviously, an important skill. They make far more than probably I make or others make. Yeah. But to present that as like,
plumbers make a lot.
Yeah, and to present that as like, well, also I think let's put out the data there that we live in a corporate world where they will make they're going to Grubhub plumbing, or they're going to, Uber plumbing.
Yeah.
And it's going to be and so you're going to be in a position where some 22-year-old is going to suddenly, your business is going to be bought, and some 22-year-old is going to be with some, multiple degrees, your boss, like a lot of recognizing what the world is and your ability to have, so the sense of, and again, it's not about formalized education, because that's also what Bobart is fighting against, is formalized education. Their fear is that their gun-toting kids meets a gay person, meets a woman, and like, oh, well, maybe I should, because again, college is where you meet, you meet people of different.
Well, that's like specifically why they told people, like, that's why they would always tell kids like me, like, oh, well, you're getting made fun of now, but when you go to college, you'll be the cool one. And that is like factually true. When I got older, people did not make fun of my clothes as much, or my interests. A lot of these kids, when they go off to college, they then feel isolated, which then adds into their whole like, oh, college is evil thing.
Yes. Different world for them. But I think it's also as a chance to learn something, be different. I mean, formalized education, what they're objecting to. For me,
the more you're around people, the less foreign they are, or
And there has to be, I mean, they've broken out. I mean, there's not a dramatic or statistically significant difference between how myself as a college educated Black person and someone around my same age who's not college educated but Black votes tend to vote still for Democrats or whatever. We still like, hey, gay people should exist or whatever. It is specifically an issue, what would you say, with the dominant culture of white people, that there's a
it's
huge
with white people.
division between
Because
college educated and
it's
non-college
easier.
educated.
Yeah.
And for women as well. And that also frustrates me. The same people will. It bothered me when it's like, oh wow, there's a huge shift from white women voters in Virginia. That sort of sunk McCullough, and the response would be, well, not college educated white women. It's just like, well, what kind of feminism is that? You're just sort of cutting. Well, none of those. I'm the good white lady. I'm a liberal and college educated. It's really a problem with those people. But it's like, well, that's still. I mean, most likely. But I mean, granted, in a weird way, I have more experience with non-college white, educated working class, because I grew up around, rural South Carolina. I know those folks probably more so than some of these college educated white people who never have. So they do look at them from that class lens, right? Like that is some sort of difference. And this goes back to, again, even on the most base political level, if you look at who vote for Democrats, paying off your student, don't think about Republicans. Republicans don't. They don't think about, oh, well, this, passing this bill to help cops, for the wealthiest Americans, or to help cops beat up and get away with qualified immunity. Democrats hate that. I shouldn't pass that. They only think about what percentage of my voters would love this. I need to deliver for them. So Democrats should think, yeah, student loan benefits a lot of people. And to the extent that we have voters, say people of color who aren't college educated, who not directly benefit.
It's freezing up on me.
Sorry. I think it's certainly on I'm sorry, I'm happening sort of on your side. But yes, the sense
we're back.
Yes, we are back. So the sense that college, to benefit college, if you are a Democrat, it would behoove you to encourage more people to go to college. So that actually should be, along with obviously voting rights and enfranchisement. But yes, alleviating,
that should be a priority.
But helping more people go to college, because it is clear that they will not even just sort of be better people, just in the sense of they will more likely be people who are going to vote for Democrats, which is how Republicans see it. That's the funny thing. Republicans see that as your sole reason for DC statehood. Your sole reason for this is, people voting for Democrats, because they are very transactional. And I said, well, yes, and maybe that's not a bad thing. Maybe it's actually a positive.
I don't think that people should be, no taxation without representation. I think it's weird that it is weird that DC is not a state. I think it's bizarre.
Yeah. Well, what about the sense that they get representation from either Virginia or Maryland or whatever? Does that seem fair to you? It doesn't seem fair to me, because that's overtly sort of wink to the white people who live in the Virginia suburbs and the Maryland suburbs. Those of you who live in the city,
was not a very, very black city. If it were like a whiter city, I'm absolutely positive that, or district or whatever, they would have had normal voting rights decades ago.
That's like a state, almost a state level population compared to some other states.
I'm pretty sure there's probably more people in DC than Rhode Island, where I am from. Definitely more than Wyoming.
And they made it a sense of, well,
DC gets to be a state.
DC does not produce anything. DC does not do, it was absurd during the Republicans were like, well, it was like Calvin Ball. So it was just like, if I was deciding why should Stephen have a vote and Robyn shouldn't? And it was like, well, the state of Stephen has sweaters and glasses. It's like, oh, well, I guess that's a good point. I don't have glasses. They got me there. I guess I don't get. It's like, well, no, this is obviously all BS to just justify why Wyoming should be able. I mean, I think someone said like car dealerships which itself is not true. There actually are car dealerships in DC. So, you know, yes,
DC has stuff.
Yeah. Well, I felt like DC should have been part of the Amy Coney Barrett revenge. That should have been the sort of the pound of flesh. And obviously because of Manchin, the idea of like, okay, well, which is what Republicans do. And Republicans said, even with Barrett, oh, well, we said this with Garland, but then you got mad when we almost put an attempted rapist on the Supreme Court. So now forget that. Like, what? Like, well, that doesn't make sense. Instead, it's like, okay, well, you forced through Barrett on the Supreme Court, you know, despite Ginsburg's dying wish a week before the election. All right, DC's going to be a state. We're going to pass voting.
Exactly.
Do more, you know, and for that to not happen, and when that you have that in place to happen, is frustrating. And when people tell me that it's like, okay, well, Manchin and Sinema aren't really Democrats, or I mean, it's Parker Loy put it well. Of just, I just loved her sort of. I don't want to call it a breakdown, but just like it to me, it was hilariously like, what are you talking about? It's like, well, you realize that Biden ran for his ability to work with Republicans.
Yeah.
And he can't.
That was his whole deal. That was like, oh, I'm not like one of those crazy libs like Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren who's going to put them off. Everyone puts them off. Let's just accept this.
And he can't get Manchin and Sinema to say voting rights. I said my big speech, which is, you know, my big speech was, Black people have my back. I'm going to have yours.
Yeah.
And you can't get these two white folks in a room and say, I made this promise. We're doing this. You're not going to get your vanity. I will.
Exactly. You don't get your things if we don't get ours. Like that is like, that's what needs to happen.
He gave them every shot, right? He gave Manchin a shot, and McConnell still laughed in his face because for whatever reason. So it you know, that is frustrating. And yeah, like, sure, like as people say, like Sanders, he couldn't have gotten all those votes from those votes. Well, sure. But the reason I voted, not me personally, but the reason a lot of people voted for Biden was that I voted for Biden. I mean, I did not.
Did you in the primary?
No. No one. My primary doesn't matter. I was not. I was.
I'm teasing you.
I was Harris and Warren, which are supposed to be incompatible. That was supposed to be incompatible for me to support both. But I was.
Well, the Warren people didn't. Like, I will say, it's kind of funny because like the Warren people had no idea that there was like this war going on. They were fairly clueless. And then like, you know, all of a sudden it was like, oh my God, the Harris people are really mad at us. Like that came out of nowhere. We did not expect that, but here we are.
Well, I think just to take that aside, one big thing that comes up a lot was that Kamala had wanted that Trump's tweets were dangerous and he should be banned from Twitter. And then Warren was not immediately supportive of that, which is interesting because I was not actually immediately supportive of removing Trump from Twitter. I have complex views on that in a sense.
Now
you're frozen again. Now you're back.
We're back. Okay. I wanted to address something quickly on the YouTube comments. Someone said that they were told there would be booze. This is a hot toddy, which technically I'm not drinking for booze reasons, but because I very clearly have a bit of a cold. So not COVID, just I have general sinus issues all of the time, always.
I've ordered hot toddies in bars, in piano bars, which is a very complex New York thing, but I know a piano bar in Chicago.
It's called Davenport. Someday you'll come visit me and we'll go.
Yes,
they have a show tunes open mic night.
Yes,
I feel like
we will perform, and that will be awesome.
It will.
Yeah,
the people will love it.
But yes, we were saying before you cut out was that because I was not necessarily in favor of cutting Trump. I mean, Trump later started escalating to the point where he was clearly committing violence. But at the same time, it was never, I sort of disagreed, especially in the primaries during early 2020. Democrats were essentially running on the campaign of Trump is effing crazy. And when there was data that's shown when he's not on Twitter, like people who aren't on Twitter or weren't, did not think Trump was that crazy. He kind of came out and was maybe wacky dad at a press conference, but not at a level of derangement that his tweets made. But this kind of goes to what I feel is a weird head in the sand reaction Democrats will have, which is like, well, stop talking about Bobart and Green, even though they are running the Republican Party.
The Republican Party,
yeah. Instead, let's focus on just focus on all the great stuff, which I get that, be positive and not negative, but that's not how these campaigns are working right now. And especially when your whole argument is, this is what is dangerous. Republicans are fundamentally dangerous. Then you need to be able to show and lean and to make that scandal along, because we kind of let a lot of Trump scandals die to the point that now.
Because this is the thing, you were constantly inundated with them. Like, it wasn't like it was just like once in a while. It was one after another, after another, after another. And when it happens like that, when it is one after another constantly, people just sort of get numb after a while. When it's one big giant scandal that happens, then people can spend like weeks on it, or not even like a big giant scandal, like a small scandal.
Oh yes, a gaffe, like McCullough
like
saying,
Obama's canned soup.
Yes,
and whatever.
Or the I meant to ask you about the Fox News, the metal tree going on fire or something, or which would turned out to be some sort of viewed as a hate crime against Christians without any actual evidence or data. It's just like basically
Christians want to hate crimes against them so badly. So badly. It's weird. It's fucking weird.
It's not the narrative of that they came here to escape religious persecution, and that's how the country was founded, which is actually not entirely true.
It's not true at all. They wanted to persecute other people. Like,
and they were persecuted.
The Puritans were like, the king isn't making dancing illegal. Like, literally, that was a problem. They were like, they actually wanted the king to have like more authority in terms of telling people how to live their religious lives. And the king was like, I don't give a shit about people dancing. Like, I'm not going to do that. And they were like, well, we better go to the Americas and, get our shit, get our own stuff together. No, that was not a thing. But I think they like the idea of being persecuted, because I guess there's like that Bible, some Jesus thing where he was like, people are going to persecute you, but you're going to be right. And there's people love that narrative anyway. People who have never actually been persecuted in any way really love that narrative. I should be clear. Like, they want so badly to create a narrative wherein like white Christian people are totally oppressed, and like, because in their minds, if they can get that to like float, they will have impunity from like all other bad shit they do. Because the way that they really do think is that they think, it's the oppression Olympics, and whoever like gets to be the most oppressed gets to do whatever they want with impunity. And that's why they're mad about that shit. That's why they're mad about critical race theory. It's why they're mad about everything, because they think that they're not getting the impunity that other people are getting, which they're not actually getting.
Oh yeah. I mean, and it's, something I was writing about this earlier this week, when the Trump, the insurrection, all the insurrectionists are proven were not poor. Most of them were middle class. Very different than, say, people, quote unquote, the other side, who were who were unrest during racial unrest in the summers. Often very desperate people, certainly not well-off people, or anything that you would consider someone having to lose, things to lose. But these folks were believing like, oh, we can go and they
You're
discovered.
frozen on me. I don't know if I'm frozen on you. I can't tell.
You froze
You're
on
out.
me. But we can also look at your nail polish. Your nails were up for a bit. Was like one like gold.
You were frozen to me also. My nails are really jacked up right now.
But it's like intentional, like one is gold and one is red, or am I just misreading them?
Yes. This is actually like the least amount of nail art I've done in a while. Like it's not even nail art. I just like painted one a different color. My nails are usually far more elaborate than this. I've got like, I glue shit to them.
Yeah.
I've got problems. This is how I express my creativity.
But yeah, just very quickly, what I had said before was just that they revealed the data that the people, the insurrectionists, were most likely to have been from not just for rural Trump towns, but towns that Biden had won, counties Biden had won, and it traces back to the Republican primaries where Trump was more likely to win states with a specific minority population, where Trump was winning predominantly white states because they're kind of like, yeah, well, I don't feel under threat. So like Trump's white identity politics and what Fox does appeals to people who feel deliberately under threat from minorities, from women, from that the world is changing fundamentally. And I think that's why 2016 was such a key election, because I think there was an ability, and certainly there's tons of racial backlash against Obama.
Oh, yeah.
There's no question. But there was a sense of a sort of, look the other way. This is a man who's president. It's a man telling you. They still didn't necessarily like that he was a black guy telling people what to do. This is that authority. But Clinton was a woman. And I think, so I think that fundamental, that exploded the rage. I mean, you could not write a sort of better matchup between Clinton had represented as sort of potentially the first woman president, having been the first visible first lady who have like kept her name to some regard, who had a career, all that resentment towards her, versus Donald Trump, the living personification of toxic masculinity. Yeah. Although he was hip for a while, I think something I've mentioned. I don't know if you're ever a viewer of Sex and the City, but the Chris Noth character in this. I feel like
you watch so many shows that like hypothetically I should have watched as like a millennial lady, and like you're so much more familiar with them, and I'm like, I'm a millennial white lady and I have zero idea what you are talking about with half the shows. Although I feel like I'm excused on MASH because it wasn't on when I was alive.
I am old taste as a Gen Xer, but essentially the only reason I bring it up is that he was described in the first pilot as a young Donald Trump, essentially hot Trump that she was into. And so there's a period in New York where, yes, that was, and on Cheers, there was a character who was supposedly a Trump-like character, except played by the great Roger Rees, so English and less odious, so you can watch it and not feel terrible. But essentially, for those of us who remember the 80s very well, as I do, there was a lot of sense of Trump. That sort of awfulness of Trumpness was seen as desirable, or was presented as desirable. Yeah, no,
I'm aware of that. Yeah.
And I think there was this shocked, I think from certain corners of the Democratic Party, it was just like, oh, well, surely you realize he's a vulgar, terrible guy. And
he's a joke.
Even despite the fact of, no, this is what, then maybe that is that sort of that disconnect from quote unquote normal people of how they've been.
But that's also literally who has won every Republican election, with the possible exception of Bush Sr. since for the last 40 years. Like, people thought that Ronald Reagan was a joke because he was an actor in movies with like a chimpanzee. Sorry, I never actually saw it. Bobo or something. The chimpanzee's name was Bonzo. Sorry, I know the Ramones, but like George W. Bush was a joke, and each time people are like, people won't vote for a total joke to represent us, but obviously they will.
And I think Democrats have kind of gone along with Republicans in rehabbing Reagan, as
Oh yeah.
opposed to Democrats are like, will kind of, in the interest of fair play, be like, oh, maybe Clinton was a total scumbag. I mean, they won't criticize him from the left, but they'll criticize him from the moral standpoint, which I arguably could care, don't care anything about. But like, oh, maybe he was a scumbag. We should have retired, and then that would have been a wonderful thing, and we could have, whatever. But resigned. But with Reagan, I mean, there's interviews with him with Johnny Carson, like in '77 or '78, when he's being asked if he was going to potentially run, because at that point he had challenged Ford but had not succeeded. And it's a version of Trump. So essentially, the people who think they know what they're doing are idiots. I mean, it's just a more sophisticated version of Trump. The people who think they know what they're doing are idiots. It's a lot of the anti-intellectualism. So the idea, he had one story about how these are all this wasted spending in academic research. And that there was one place in Michigan where they were studying like whether chitlins are bad for you. And he was like, well, I taught there was one guy who's obviously a black man. It's like, I could tell you chitlins are bad for you without the study, blah, 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 which is, of course, not in any way actually what is happening. But again, very similar to what we saw with race theory and whatever, which will take one aspect of it and then inflate it to make it look absurd. Like, what?
Oh yeah, no, I mean, it's the same thing, quite frankly, with tort reform bullshit. Like,
so
where they're like, this is a crazy lawsuit, except the lawsuit was actually not stupid, or it didn't go through. Me now.
Now you're frozen. Wonderful, yes, but and I think never Trumpers they get very resistant if you try to draw a line back to Trump, from Trump to Reagan. And for them, so for never Trumpers, you can't claim that Reagan in any way influenced Trump. Trump has to be an anomaly.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of Democrats will say, okay, well, fine, because we really need the support of Rick Wilson. And that we will agree that there was something noble about conservatism. I mean, David Brooks wrote this, of where I fell in love with conservatism as a young man, and then it became something terrible. And it's like, well, like when Nixon was president, or the Southern strategy, were you that? And it's by the same way with Nancy Reagan, if we could talk about her, because that was part of the idea that she wasn't someone who represented a lot of negative things. It was just sort of, no. She was this lovely, wonderful gal.
Nice lady who screwed over her best friend while he was dying of AIDS. But she wore wide-brimmed hats, I guess. And Trumpy-looking clothes. Congratulations.
Yeah, she was not. I mean, it was such obvious. Again, what is it? It's Ben Shapiro's sister, who was this shaming of Madonna.
Classically Abby.
I mean,
odd person.
I'm gonna assume that I have some years on her. So people were slut shaming Obama when I was in high school. So I feel like, well, why are you still doing this? And then there's sort of this idea that she is. But beyond the slut shaming, it was like, okay, so fine that you're a professional slut, but now you're 60 and now need to don't try to be sexy or do anything with
I think it's actually pretty awesome that she's doing that. Oh, sorry, kicked my stand thingy. No, I'm super pro Madonna, looking way hotter than I will ever look in my entire life.
I just feel I just don't. That goes back to being friends with Republicans or whatever, because they're very angry about. I wrote about this earlier this week. So it's just like, I mean, fundamentally, if that angers you more, like Madonna, and who again is an artist who and as you shown, dresses for the occasion, and this is in her sense of whatever, but like I'm gonna pose with guns at my holiday party. That's America.
Yeah. Oh, that's classy. That's absolute class.
I just have no connection to that. And the idea of these folks whining. There was Kayleigh McEnany was whining about that. Of like 72% of Democrats wouldn't date a Republican. And it's like, But
Oh,
you,
they're so constantly, they're so mad about it. I
but
mean,
all
yes,
you
we're
talk
super
about is
pretty,
how
but
terrible we are. Why would you want to date? You just said I am a godless socialist, un-American, too woke. Like I'm a bad
yeah,
person.
but who do you think is better in bed?
Yes, you got me. You got
Yeah,
me
they're like,
there. Like why would you want to? It's such a strange, like, and what kind of friendship is that? Because I sense of, you know, I could probably, like, let's say there's someone who I went on a road trip and we would always agree on the music to play. But then if we
mhm.
heard very disturbing political news, we can't share that with either of us.
Yeah,
Whereas I would rather you and I, if we disagree, we don't, but on a lot of music, but we
yeah.
were to like
No, we
fight
both have
about the music.
excellent taste in musical themes.
We would like disagree on the music. That's kind of fun and wacky,
Yeah,
romantic comedy. And then if we hear, oh my God, they've overturned Roe v. Wade, I'm not going,
yeah,
yeah. And you're like, oh, because a friend is supposed to be like, oh my God, my friend feels terrible about this.
yeah.
I knew a lot of,
Human empathy. Well, because here's the thing, a very large part of having a relationship with people, friendship or otherwise, is like actual human empathy.
oh
And
yeah,
if you're friends with a Republican, they're pretty much saying, like, I don't care about other people so much.
and yeah,
And,
and
that to
even if
me is
you,
a red flag.
even if you were empathetic to the point, like let's say I had friends who this came up with, like with black women who they were children. It's like they were very like psychologically damaged from Tamir Rice, Trayvon Martin.
Yeah.
They're at an age of have a child, have a black child. What's this going to mean? I'm scared.
You
Even
just
though
made me feel really old. Sorry.
they had there would be white friends who were conservative who were empathetic, but usually in a sense of, oh, it's not really a problem for your kid because they will. This
Yeah.
idea, because it's a Republican empathy of like, you won't have to worry about this problem because you can be brought into the in crowd. It's like you can be, which is not necessarily true, but that's a way of it, or of a sense of, oh well, maybe this is why they deserve. It's like fundamentally not connecting. Essentially, if you fundamentally don't believe, like with poverty, like you fundamentally believe that the
Yeah.
problem with homeless people is that they're in your airline hangar, like Caitlyn Jenner, like I mean, she's gonna probably her friends have similarly share that sense of that's the bummer. I'm gonna bond with people in my airline hangar about how terrible homeless people are, and I tend to like want to chat with people about actual real issues
Yeah.
and so forth. So yes, but they will always be the intolerant left forever, I guess.
Can I tell you a quick story
Please
that
do.
is relevant? When I was 23 years old, I dated this guy and like I thought he was very dreamy. He was 32, so he was a little bit older. He was like in a garage band. He liked the Cramps a lot. I was like, these are the standards that I have at this moment. Kind of looked like Ellis Costello. And we went on like after like our third date or whatever, we didn't talk about politics that much, even though I kind of did. He didn't really. I got to his apartment and there was a framed picture of Ronald Reagan. It was terrifying. And I started crying because that's how I operated at that point. And then I was like, you know what?
Was it
Maybe I
tasteful?
will be like a super, like, I'm going to be a person who is open-minded and everything. And I'm going to like try continuing this. And the end result of that was that he made fun of me in front of all of my friends for protesting the World Trade Organization and called me an idiot. And then somehow I continued dating him because I have problems. And then like ghosted me, which is fine. I'm pro ghosting, but called me back a month later to try and get my congratulations on the fact that he found a nice blonde girl in the suburbs to date. and then get my address so that he could mail me my Camus book back. And I don't normally make fun of people who pronounce things incorrectly.
Yes. Well, you brought it all back.
That was like a...
I don't normally, that's the brick joke. I always make fun of people.
Under normal circumstances, I do not. But that was just like, so he sent me that back with like a photocopied picture of an article about or printed picture of an article that like proved that I was wrong about what the next Of the Dead movie was going to be. And I was like, that is why you don't date Republicans. Because they're actually bad people.
And there's a lot and if you're a Republican, there's a lot of Republicans amongst to date. It's not the worst. Like, people tend to date people with similar interests, and how politically is somewhat a huge thing. I mean, I know life is not a rom-com. Like, I need to, well, if
like, oh, we fight and hate each other, and then like no.
To reference another show you might not have.
Don't date jerks.
Friends.
What show?
Friends.
Oh, I know.
Yeah, there. You like, you're like, again.
You are so much better at being a white millennial woman than I am. Culturally.
You are like. Are you sure you weren't kidnapped or like the again, like the TV show The Pretender, where the guy's raised in a...
No, as previously established, I was very punk rock, and
well, the couple, it was Chandler and Monica were going to essentially be a miserable couple together, because she's like obsessive compulsive, everything has to be right, and he's kind of just but it creates interesting tension on the show, but like generally like this isn't going to work out. But usually what happens is like, oh well, you're so different, that everyone's brought to the happy medium. It's sort of the centrist theory of dating. Like, centrist, the idea is like, oh well, this is what makes a great couple. This, she's AOC and Connor Lamb, and they get together, and then all their thoughts are moderated and similar, as opposed to her dating someone more like her, him dating someone more like him. I think maybe that's what people think, that's a positive development, but I tend to think that's not ideal. I think that it's good to be different in ways of like, maybe you like this TV show, someone likes another, but you kind of agree that, women are people. And
exactly. Like, you're a romantic comedy person. I am not. I have never really liked the whole like, this person's a jerk. Like, but then you get to know them and they're great. I hate that. I think, people should be not jerks.
Oh yeah. Well, I think it's very
tough. And then like, oh, that's like super hot romance because the person is an asshole. I hate that.
Yes, I think they try to find, because it's called a term called a romantic antagonist. So generally it's literally a sense of, in the romantic comedy, the villain is essentially Lex Luthor and Superman, but they're having sex at the end, which would be weird, right? But that's how romantic comedies are structured. It is essentially, I'm gonna put your business out of, and put your business out of business, and you're gonna like be like, oh, don't do that, and then we'll fall in love. But essentially we are at opposite ends, because that is what, and it's a weird thing about romantic comedies, right? Like,
they're trying to like horseshoe theory romance.
Tension.
I disagree.
I disagree of Christmas, and you hate, I hate Christmas, and then then it all comes together, and we kind of realize you become fundamentally a different person. Because that's what people want. But to me, it's like people want to be recognized that who they are is okay, as they find the person who's like, well, you're okay the way you are.
Yeah.
And that tends to not make for good drama. So,
as my mom used to say, people will love you for how you make them feel about themselves.
Exactly. I feel good. You make me feel good that who I am as a person, but that does not make
exactly.
But someone has to learn and change. So, what is good? So we're very close to the Christmas holidays. Have you done all your shopping and trees and decks and halls and all of that? Are you
It's
ready?
so cute that you think I've done any of that. No. A, I'm a hot mess in general. B, I actually have to go to Florida on Tuesday because my dad, for anyone who doesn't know, I think you all know, my mom passed on Halloween. And so things are kind of messed up, and we're going to Florida because my dad doesn't want to spend the holiday here. And that's a
Makes
pain
sense.
in the ass. And so I haven't done any Christmas shopping or anything or whatever yet. I personally think that we should be like the Italians in Italy and celebrate on January 6th, do the presents on January 6th, because that way you hit all the sales, but no one ever wants to listen to me because I'm not Christian anyway. So.
They just give each other photos of the gifts you want, and then okay, we'll get them for you.
Yeah.
Real on January 6th and so forth. So
Yeah,
I think
exactly.
My parents did that one year where they were they brought me into a room. I remember this very clearly, and it was we just want you to know we still love each other, but we're probably going to get presents for each other in the new year once the sales are. And I was
I love that. Your parents are
correct. I'm still getting my gifts, right? It's oh yeah. So they were essentially putting all the money they had for my spoiled ass. So I would get the normal Christmas thing, but then okay, well,
I think that's awesome.
Yes, that was very nice.
That is how things should be. My mom and I fought for this every single year because we don't care about holidays. We do care about presents. And we were wait until the sales are over. The second, the day after Christmas, I think everything in all these, everything is half off. Screw Black Friday.
Exactly.
Celebrate when you want.
Get the stuff you want at the time, and then open at the
I mean, Christmas Eve is our big holiday anyway. We don't do shit for Christmas Day. That's for wasps. I don't know. We're just no, we're all tired by then.
Yeah, we should. I mean, Christmas Day is usually relaxing. I usually try to. I make a Christmas dinner. Growing up, we would go out on Christmas Eve, but not anything fancy because very little was open. So you're talking about takeout, but it was very nice to go out and watch old movies and whatever. And I mean, it's fun. I'm sure my dad was had to stay up all night trying to get stuff put together, and my mom was, kept everything.
I felt really bad for my parents because I stopped believing in Santa Claus at 5, because as I have mentioned, they could not explain to me why the elves were working for free. I did not
Why can't they just say they pay them very well? Why can't
they were we don't know what they get paid, and I was are they unionized?
They're basically slaves, Robyn. They're slaves.
Yeah, no, I was they're slaves. How are they not slaves? And then after that, you just couldn't get anything past me. And so I would wake up really early in the morning to try and catch them in the act. And so my poor parents, we'd host Christmas Eve at our house. So 40,000 people were here. They were exhausted. And they had to stay up so late and then figure out some way to evade my detective skills that I had. Not at all, but I woke up really early.
That's a lot of effort for a kid to not just say, look, because you just want the present. So just if you're not into it, don't. I was very kind of. I did find a secret hiding place of toys early on, and I was oh wow, I got all these toys. And then my parents got very angry. They found the toys. So I was just oh wow, I found this cool toy. And it's a 5-year-old. You just think oh wow, look what I wasn't even trying to hide it. I was wow, someone left this cool
closet 1 year. Really? I'm not gonna find that. I'm a fool. No.
Well, before we go, I would want to acknowledge Anne Rice passed away, I think last night.
I was going to say, I'm so sorry for what I assume is a big loss for you.
You know me well. Yes, I was a big fan of her and her books long ago when I read them, and but a good run. I always loved it. She had a beautiful home in in New Orleans, and I'm a big fan of New Orleans, and she wrote very nicely of New Orleans. So, well, thank you, Robyn, and we'll see each other next week. It's probably our last for the. We'll have to offline figure out what our schedule is.
We'll figure it out.
But talk to everyone soon.
Bye,
Take care.
everyone. Okay, bye.